Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session here. This is on Jamf's developer portal and our APIs. And I'm here to introduce the guy I sit across from at the desk, Brad Becker.
All right. Thank you, Mike, and welcome to everybody. So we are almost done with the first day of JNUC 2017. I hope everybody has been having a great JNUC so far. I know that I've seen a whole bunch of really great presentations up until this point. And of course, the keynote, as usual, was amazing. And it's always extremely difficult to get up here on the same stage and kind of try to follow that up. I'm not going to have any sort of lip syncing in my presentation, but I am really excited to get up here and talk to you all about some projects that we've actually been working on over the past year or so that I'm really excited about. So of course, developer portal and APIs. So what are these projects? The Jamf developer portal that you heard a little bit about this morning, and also the Jamf Marketplace. So before I dive in and kind of discuss both of these, I wanted to take a little bit of a step back and talk about the history of APIs at Jamf. So right around 2010 or so, we actually released the Casper Suite REST API. The purpose of this API was to allow for more programmatic access for our customers and also developers to gain access to the data within their JSS and to manipulate that data. The response to this API was pretty tremendous. We immediately saw customers start to create some pretty cool integrations with the systems and software within their own environments. And what was even more cool about this was that we actually started to see people share these integrations across the wider Jamf and Apple community. So time went on, and Mac and iOS have really become more first-class citizens within the enterprise and education. And we've actually started to see more and more third-party developers and software vendors actually approach Jamf to build their own native integrations with Jamf. So we've kind of reached this point now where we have kind of a robust and growing ecosystem of both open source and also enterprise integrations. And along this journey, we've tried to make improvements to our APIs, add some additional functionality and features like webhooks, which was a big one that we announced a little bit over a year ago. But what we really haven't done is we haven't done a really great job of communicating to you how to effectively leverage all of these different pieces of functionality and features that we expose. But that changes today. So again, you heard a little bit about it from Charles in the keynote this morning, but I wanted to kind of officially announce to you the new Jamf developer portal, which is available today at developer.jamf.com. And there it is. So let's dive right in. I want to talk about some of the important features and kind of the thought process behind the new Jamf developer portal. And the main thing, or the first thing I want to talk about are improvements to the API reference. So many of you, if you've used our API in Jamf Pro in the past, you're probably familiar with the API reference located at the /API page within every single Jamf Pro instance across the planet. That page is not going away. We think that there's a lot of value there. It gives you the ability, of course, to actually execute API commands directly against your Jamf Pro instance, which is super valuable. But what we did realize as we've talked to you and our developer partners and also flat out used that reference on our own is that the documentation within there was quite honestly subpar. So we've actually gone through and we've rewritten the entire API specification that actually drives the pages like that for the new Jamf developer portal. So that actually gave us the ability to kind of rethink things and really do some additional things within the developer portal. One of the main things that we were able to do was we were actually able to now include models and example data within the API reference. So this is kind of an example here of the old style or the legacy API reference page that you see within Jamf Pro. And you'll notice here, we've got a handful of implementation notes that kind of describe a little bit of how to use this particular endpoint and operation. We list a single parameter there. It doesn't indicate whether it's required or optional. We also don't list out any other sort of required or optional parameters in there. So it's not super helpful. What we've actually done is we've gone through, and for every single endpoint in operation, we've actually fully documented the entire model structure that you can see there, and we've included example data. So you can see exactly what parameters are required or optional to perform every single API call within Jamf Pro. Another thing that we did was we actually went through and we fully documented all of the API endpoints within Jamf Pro. And what I mean by this, I'll show you an example that kind of demonstrates it. Again, this is kind of the old style description within the API reference within your Jamf Pro instance. And you'll notice that within the implementation notes of this particular operation, we also indicate that you can actually perform a put or post or delete using the same resource URL pattern. That's good to know. It's a little bit helpful. It's not super helpful. And it's also not the best practice on how you really should document an API. So what we've done is we've actually gone through, we've identified all of the instances where that actually happens within the old API specification, and we've pulled those out. And we've actually created individual operations within the appropriate endpoints. And that allowed us to include the model and example data for all of those endpoints as well. We've also gone through and we've improved more of what I would call the general documentation around the Jamf Pro API. So up until this point, we haven't really done a good job at Jamf of kind of showing you how to utilize the API. There's a handful of kind of third-party projects that are scattered about that kind of give you an indication of how to do this, but we've never actually provided anything great for this. So we actually have gone through and we've documented kind of the authentication that you need to use to use the API, a little bit about the schema behind the API, and then also one thing that's kind of interesting for me is we've actually documented all of the potential error codes that you could see as you're interacting with our API. And in certain situations, we actually try to tell you what to do when you encounter those error codes and how to handle that. Another improvement that we made was improved webhook documentation. And when I say improved webhook documentation, what I really mean is we just documented webhooks. So it's true. So webhooks, we came out with those probably about 1.5 years ago, I believe, and they have been an extremely popular feature. They're incredibly useful for a whole bunch of different use cases, and I think that there is basically a single paragraph within the administrator's guide on actually how to use them. So it doesn't go too much in depth, and we've gotten a lot of requests on how to actually use webhooks, both externally and also internally, because we use them ourselves. So we went through and we fully documented every single possible webhook that you can use within Jamf Pro. We've gone through and we've documented the individual payloads, so what you can expect to see when you utilize and you configure those webhooks. And then we actually also went through and documented exactly what events within your Jamf Pro instance will actually trigger those webhooks. So hopefully this will be a lot more helpful. I know it is going to be a lot more helpful for me using these as well. A final thing that we did was we actually created some code samples. So this is another thing that we really haven't had in the past. So we actually went through and we identified a handful of common use cases that we encounter and our customers encounter. And we actually went through and created code samples in both Curl and Python to try to make it a little bit easier to really get up to speed, get started using the Jamf Pro API. And also, even if you have been using the Jamf Pro API for a while, this should really speed up your development process. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of the developer portal. But what I want to say is that this is version 1. This is kind of our first iteration of this developer portal. We do not intend for this to be a static page. We intend for this to be a growing and continually iterating source of information. We want it to be the single source of truth for all things developer related at Jamf. And we actually have a couple of more short-term things on our roadmap that we're looking to implement in the near future. Additional code samples. So right now, we have a very small subset of typical use cases that we've gone through and we've documented. We want to expand those out, increase those use cases, and we also want to expand out beyond just Curl and Python to additional programming languages. Consistency with the /API page, so with the existing API reference within Jamf Pro. So I mentioned earlier that we basically went through and we rewrote the entire API specification that kind of drives that page. We're undergoing some engineering work actually as we speak to try to basically bring that API reference on the developer portal in line with the API reference within Jamf Pro. And hopefully we'll be able to do that shortly so that you can see all of that great documentation that we have out on developer.jamf.com directly within your Jamf Pro instance. And finally, try it out functionality within the developer portal. So you've got that right now in kind of the existing API reference within your own Jamf Pro instance. We want to put that functionality out onto the developer portal. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like. It could be a matter of allowing you to point to your Jamf Pro instance. It also could be a matter of potentially putting some test data behind that so that we could actually allow anybody to go out to developer.jamf.com and interact with our API without actually having to have a Jamf Pro instance. So what are the next steps? So a couple of different things for you. First and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, we intend for this to be the single source of truth for developer-related information at Jamf. So this is for you. Get out there and use it. And we also want to hear feedback because we want to continue to improve this. So a couple of different ways that you can give that feedback to us. Email. So developer.relations@jamf.com is the email address that goes to my team where we're actually collecting recommendations for improvements and feature requests and basically putting those onto the roadmap for the new Jamf developer portal going forward. Of course, as always, Jamf Nation. Many of you are probably familiar with the API tag out on Jamf Nation. That's one that people have been conversing with for a while. We actually recently also added a couple of additional tags to kind of allow you to focus more in, focus the conversations a little tighter. And that's the webhooks tag and the developer portal tag. So definitely get out there, continue the conversation, start the conversation. We watch all of those tags. So we'll hop in if necessary to kind of communicate in that fashion. Twitter. So if Twitter is kind of your way of communicating, we actually have a fairly new Jamf DevRel Twitter account that we would like to use to kind of communicate along that channel. So if you're on Twitter, feel free to hop out, follow us, tweet at us there, and we can start the conversation along that channel. And finally, Slack. So the Mac admin's Slack workspace, just even beyond Jamf-related stuff, go out there and join this. This is just an incredibly valuable resource from an Apple perspective. We also are involved in the JSS API channel. So if you do hop out there onto Slack, if you're not already on there, please join the JSS API channel. My team is active in that channel, in addition to actually many other Jamfs across departments that take a particular interest in developer and API-related topics. So that brings us to Jamf Marketplace. So again, you heard a little bit about this from Charles at the keynote this morning, but as we were going through and building out the Jamf developer portal, it actually became pretty evident to us that we also didn't do a great job of publicizing the integrations that people have already built, people and organizations have already built. So these conversations kind of led to this idea around the Jamf Marketplace. And again, as Charles mentioned earlier, it is available today at marketplace.jamf.com. Right now on day one, we have kind of an initial selection of trusted partners that we've gone out and that we've worked with in the past, and we've populated the marketplace with those partners. Everybody on the marketplace, all entries are curated for an appropriate level of support and compatibility so that you can ensure kind of the value of these integrations that we list. And there's going to be more coming soon. So again, this is basically day one of the marketplace. We do kind of have that listing of initial partners, but we are continuing to build that out, getting more partners in there as time progresses and as people start to build more and more of these integrations. So another interesting thing that you did hear about in the keynote this morning as well was the Jamf Consultants Network. And the Jamf Consultants Network is actually really interesting to me. I actually come from a professional services background here at Jamf. And we have a pretty long history at Jamf of using trusted third parties to perform Jamf-related services. So many of you out here have probably been a part of a Jamf Jumpstart or some other sort of Jamf service. And many of you actually may have had a non-Jamf badged employee perform that Jumpstart or that service. We've been really successful with this program. It allows us to really maintain a high level of services and deliver those services in a timely fashion. What we have been noticing more recently is that we actually get quite a few requests for non-Jamf related things, so more generalized Apple things or even just kind of general IT requests. And it's really not within our DNA at Jamf to say no to pretty much anything. And as Dean mentioned earlier in the keynote, our mission at Jamf is helping organizations succeed with Apple. It's not helping organizations succeed with Jamf. So as we get these requests, we wanted to figure out a way that we could actually help. And that's kind of where the Jamf Consultants Network came into being. So the Jamf Consultants Network is basically a collection of curated consultants that are vetted by Jamf to ensure a high level of quality and also have a level of required training. So we want to ensure that not anybody can go out and join the Jamf Consultants Network. We want to make sure that that level is at an appropriate level for you. So that's kind of what I have today in terms of the Jamf Developer Portal, the Marketplace, and the Jamf Consultants Network. I did want to talk about one more thing before we get out of here, and that is kind of an API roadmap going forward. So more on a technical as opposed to a documentation type level. And before I dive into this, I kind of have to give a disclaimer here. All of this stuff that I'm about to talk about is kind of generalized ideas. None of this is necessarily guaranteed roadmap items, and there's no timelines that I'm able to associate with any of these. So now that I have the product management disclaimer out of the way, one of the main things that we are taking a look at and we want to improve, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, is authentication and authorization. Right now, of course, with the Jamf Pro API, authentication is over basic auth, which kind of inherently links that authentication to a user account and the privileges of said user account within Jamf Pro. We know that that's not ideal, and we want to get beyond that and offer additional, more secure and more modern methods of authentication and authorization. More granular control of data. So right now, when you're using the Jamf Pro API, it's actually a little bit difficult if you want to hone in on specific pieces of data to kind of pick those out and get them from Jamf Pro by themselves. You typically have to take a larger set of data and then parse through it on your own. We want to make that a little bit easier to manipulate and work with the data within your own Jamf instance. Scalability. So scalability is kind of, even outside of API-related things at Jamf, scalability is one of the top things that we're looking at product-wide. And of course, it goes without saying that it's extremely important for our API as well. So we're looking at, again, ensuring that you can effectively work with large data sets. Right now, it is very difficult. If you have even an environment of 1,000 or a couple thousand computers or mobile devices, it's not that easy to actually get that data out of Jamf Pro using the current functionality. So we're taking a look at scalability and potentially implementing such features as like a pagination or things like that, just to make it a whole lot easier in larger environments to work with our API. And finally, webhook improvements. So I actually probably could have made an additional slide for this topic because there's just so much behind it. But this is an important thing that we're looking at, and we've gotten a tremendous response from you, from the community, in terms of feature requests. And again, this feature has only been out for about 1.5 years, but it's gotten some really good uptake. And we have a ton of requests and a ton of ideas around how to make webhooks better, be it having multiple webhook targets, potentially having like a test button for webhooks, and also adding authentication into webhooks. So that's just kind of a really small subset of some potential ideas. We have a pretty long list of things that we're looking at and looking to improve. So with that, that's kind of what I've got today. So we should have plenty of time for questions here. And again, thanks for your time. And if you want to, please hop out to the JNUC app. There's a really short survey in there. Feel free to complete that and let me know how I did. And with that, we're going to open it up to some questions.
Hello. Marketplace. So I love that we're going to have a marketplace available for us to go and look at some tools that maybe we weren't aware of. I feel like every other day I post in the Slack channel, hey, I have this problem, and somebody responds with a tool that I had never heard of, and I'm like, this would have saved me 5 hours. So right now you guys are currently vetting those before they get added, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Is there any plan to have kind of a community-driven? I know we have Jamf Nation, but that's not really, like, I'd have to go in and search for the specific problem and go through all the posts. Is there maybe hope for a community-driven one?
We haven't really talked about that. I think it probably could be valuable.
Okay.
And this is something that, again, it's day one and we're kind of iterating through. But yeah, I definitely believe it would be valuable potentially to have that into the future.
Okay, and then this may just be a feature request thing. I assume down the road there's probably going to be hundreds of things in the marketplace. It would be nice to see some way to almost like upvote the ones that people are using the most, or if we had like a vote thing that we could put in there. Is that just, should I put in a request, or is that kind of something you guys have thought about?
That is actually, there is some semblance of functionality to do that. I don't believe we've actually turned that on.
Okay.
And it's fairly rudimentary, but yes, we are looking at kind of a way to do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Hi. So with Jamf Pro 10 and the Universal API, what does the future hold for the old API? Is it going to stick around, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So Universal API, and for those of you that aren't familiar with the Universal API, it's something that we actually announced last JNUC, and the Universal API, to me, is kind of a misnomer. It's really the API that we use within version 10 to drive what you see in that new interface. So it's kind of more of a presentation API. We announced it last year, and we developed it for the presentation layer, but we thought that there was the potential to add value to customers and developers. What we didn't do was we didn't really build it out enough. We don't really feel comfortable at this point where it's at to kind of put it out there for full use. And we are kind of evaluating what the future holds in terms of a customer and developer facing API. So that being said, it's there, it's not going away because it basically drives what you see in Jamf Pro 10. So if you are able to use the functionality, the limited functionality of endpoints that's there right now, feel free to do so. But I can't guarantee that that is the API that we will use going forward for customers and developers. I hope that kind of answers it. I know it's kind of a weaving answer.
It does. And I know that with the Universal API, you're only supporting JSON. Mm-hmm. Will the existing API continue to support XML in Jamf Pro 10?
I'm sorry, will the existing API
continue to support XML?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
And second question, webhooks. Is there any plan to allow us to target a smart group or a static group for devices we want to report on? Because right now it's kind of noisy when you get a webhook for every single time a machine checks in, for instance.
I have no specific plans, but I would definitely either open up a feature request, or I wouldn't be shocked if there already is a feature request out there to upvote, because that's an excellent recommendation.
All right, thanks.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks again for your time, and have a great rest of your JNUC.